Welcome back to Greenway Audio Magazine. I am Tim, and with me is Brandon. But today we have Michael Wilson, co-founder and CEO of Franklin's. Michael, thanks for joining us. Look,
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to
in
be here.
sync applause. Love it. Yeah, thanks for joining us.
That wasn't an in-sync applause. It was a Backstreet Boys applause.
Jeez, yikes.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Little
Michael.
LFO for you. Sorry.
Wow. So Michael, Franklin's. We all know about Franklin's. We've seen it. We've heard the stories. The Blunt Kings. If I recall, aren't you like the number one blunt company in the States?
Yes is
According to Headset?
according to Headset. That was a surprise to us too. We
Really?
we love blunts,
Yeah.
and we just put our head down. And Missouri seems to love blunts too. And then we get a call from Headset, and they're like, "Hey, did you guys know that you're like number one?" And I'm like, "Well, in Missouri, yeah, like we have a pretty strong market share. We were some early movers." They're like, "No, no, no. Like nationally, you're like one of the few people in that category. It is a niche, but like you're like really, really up there." And we are like, "No, I didn't know that." And so they basically were like, "Hey, let's do a news story."
Yeah.
And the news story
What a
came
call.
out, and that generated some really cool attention. But that's really cool to get that check box, maybe you want to
Heck
call it,
yeah.
from Headset.
Yes, it
So
is. We run
Dude,
all of our stats
anytime
off
you get an
Headset.
opportunity to claim ownership of any kind of category, no matter how niche,
Yeah.
and be like, we're number one with a
Yeah.
bullet.
Right.
I think that is extraordinary. And for
Yeah.
it to be coming from in the grand scheme of things, a relatively new market, and not, some company that's been around for, 2 decades plus or something like that in California and Colorado, or some company like Raw or something that partnered with a company to create a specific brand. You guys went out and created a product, created a brand, built it, and the foundation of it was, this is how we like to consume cannabis.
Mhm.
This is our methodology. I think that's extraordinary. And you and I have
Heck yeah.
talked a lot about your story and your history and things like that. So I I don't want to overshare. I don't want to, overextend my knowledge whenever we have the opportunity for you to tell your own story, and for people who don't know all the backstory to get to know a little bit about you guys and how far you've come.
Mhm.
Because you guys are now, again, started not even as a medical marijuana company. You guys started as a hemp company in a medical marijuana market,
Yeah.
and have grown to now a multi-state operational company.
yeah, I mean, it
It's
is
fucking
crazy when you
awesome,
put it
man.
like that, man. It's wild because if the people know my personal backstory prior to this business, had a business that was very well known nationally that went under. Okay. And then, like, when the Kansas City Business Journal wrote the story of its failure, it was like my face rather than like a company picture. So, like, I got like a lot of like hatred and kind of the like good riddance kind of stuff that had happened to me. And that really kind of changed my mentality. And it was right after that business that I got a phone call from Jim Mueller at Greenlight, and he's known my dad for a very long time. My dad and him have bought and sold companies together, and he called my dad up and was like, "Hey, man, I know your son's looking for work. He's a smart guy. I just sold my operations in California and Nevada. I'm trying to come to Missouri, win some applications. Could I see if Mike's available?" And of course I was. And of course I wanted to be in this business. And so there was kind of two parallel paths. I wanted to be in cannabis. And at one point I was there making money by, being a hired gun for the Muellers and the Greenlight system, writing applications. I'm basically a grant writer. I sit there and I wrote all the words. Me and one other person wrote all the Greenlight applications. And we spent a lot of time. It was my life. And I got a bonus for writing 18 successful applications. And so that was like the perfect time. I kind of saw it all clicking together of like, okay, I've got some things going over here, little entrepreneurial ventures, but I've also got this kind of core thing that's going to make me some money, really kind of put me in the industry. And so it really worked out to where right around the time that I got my bonus, I was like, maybe I should go do this for myself. And so I picked up the phone and called Ronald Rice, a good friend of mine that I knew from the music business, who I learned about blunts from. I've always been kind of the white boy producer, of the graphics and the marketing content. He's always been the actual physical producer on the keyboards. And so we've worked together for a very long time. I was like, hey, man, you love blunts. I love blunts. We should get together and talk about like how we should do this. I got this in. That's kind of how a lot of this industry is. You need an in order to find your way into these things. Fortunately, my in was Greenlight and John Mueller, right? And so there was a lot of privilege that came with that I recognized in the early stage. They gave us a chance. I walked into John's office. I could get the meeting with him. I pitched him my whole business. He told me no so many times, told me, I don't see that this could be a national brand. He was very skeptical, and not because he's a jerk, but because he's a good entrepreneur, just being a hard skeptic of me and my business. And so he's like, all right, I'll give you a shot. And then, he bought a little bit of product for our stores, and that was our first customer. So to have Greenlight as that first customer, kind of jump ship, get a partner together, chase all that was really cool and exciting. But, it's definitely been a challenge, and I've just really wanted to be in this industry. So it's kind of taken, a lot of people went into the license side, then into hemp, and then back to license. I started in the hemp space making hemp blunts because that's the only way I could get in. I wanted to make the product. I wanted to find some way, but no one at the time who had a license was willing to say yes to me. I even went to John with one of the licenses that I helped him win. I was like, hey, would you mind co-manufacture for me? He was like, no, this is my brand. I'm producing it for myself. Go get your own brand, and I'm like, all right, but that's kind of where I just kept going and kept going. And it's really, this is a game and a market of just pure persistence. If you're an individual manufacturer, every day you're at the bottom of the food chain. So you have to act accordingly. And, I think we've done a good job getting the right people together and raising the right amount of capital, being smart about our business. And so it's kind of put us to where we are today.
You guys have done a really good job as far as the capital raise from my perception. Obviously I don't know the complete inner workings of your business and stuff like that, but one of the things we see with a lot of the mid-sized companies or the independent companies that aren't fully vertical is they're constantly struggling for funding, whether it's for a new piece of equipment, whether it's for updates, whether it's for, just reinvigorating, staff or whatever it happens to be. And you sometimes see that you take enough money and the culture changes. The VC comes in and they put in their own CEO type of thing, because at the end of the day, the person that's representing the VC has really no interest in the business other than, can we recoup the money? And I think that's where we see a lot of really cool, really uh, kind of intrinsic brands fall by the wayside, is because at some point you owe people enough money that operationally you can't pay it back in a timely manner, so then you start losing control of your operations. You guys have built this really unique brand. You even, talking about the brand itself, you had to change up the name at one point, but you guys have built this brand that, to me, kind of represents everything that we've seen in street and urban and collector culture for the last like 10 to 15 years or more. I remember the first time I saw like a $100 bill printed on the underside of a skateboard in like 2004. And so I remember the famous Stars and Straps t-shirt with the famous uh, bandana wrapped around Ben Franklin's face. So
Yep.
whenever I first saw the Franklin's imagery, I was like, dude, I'm in. Like I bought him 100%. This is something I love. It's something that's been iconography to me for, 2 decades plus. Um, the fact that other people didn't get it right away is probably a mixed bag from your perception, in that, it made the struggle a little bit harder. But for me, it's like, I love that nobody else didn't get it right away, because as soon as I saw it the first time we talked, I was like, oh, this is awesome. They're going to go, like, they've got something cool and unique and special.
Well, I really appreciate that. It's my personal passion. My mom was a high school education business technology teacher, and she taught me Photoshop 1.0. And as an entrepreneur, I was from day one trying to figure out how to make a logo for my little business in high school. And, just kind of progressed and progressed. And whatever part of my brain that I was born with that has the creative influx all the time, I just have to have an outlet for it. And fortunately, that's this brand. And so the signature, like even the logo has intent behind it. I wanted something that looked classic, that if I had it on a shirt, it didn't scream, I smoke weed. It just screams, I'm into cool brands. And I looked at inspiration like Coca Cola and Titleist and Ford and Eli Lilly and every signature logo I could find to kind of try to hone in and smoke some pot and drink some espresso and see what comes out. And we've had a couple logos that we've designed, but really the one that stuck was the Franklin signature logo. And people recognize that. It's on hoodies, it's on hats. And, we've really gotten a really cool following. And I've invested well in merchandise to get people that logo onto their chest because that's a movable billboard. So, I could go spend 5 grand on a physical billboard or go spend $20 at cost. And now Bud Tender wears that maybe one day a week. That's one billboard I got in there at least one day a week of one excited person. So I appreciate anytime somebody sees that we really do put care and attention into the brand. There's a lot of ethos into all the things that we're trying to do and attempting to do. And it's all rooted in quality, and it's all rooting in listening to what the consumer says, what their feedback is. Sometimes they don't like stuff what we do. I mean, we've had products, we had a James lemonade, that was in a tiny little 8-ounce clear can because it's like all that you could get back then from a can standpoint. And some people didn't like the taste because back then we were making water soluble and dosing it with a pipette. We were literally taking it from a big container and dosing it and then just shaking that up. And then as we produce more and more of these, we learn, well, the consumer doesn't like that final little taste of water soluble on their tongue. So how do you get rid of that? And the answer of it is you got to move into carbonated beverages and carbonation. And that whole process really breaks up that water soluble content where you don't taste it anymore. And so, moving from James Lemonade and learning those lessons to now making a Franklin's Lemonade with new improvements of carbonation and the changes that the consumers wanted, that's better than me coming in saying, like, oh, I've got a hot, successful formula from somewhere else. We're going to jam it down your throat, Missouri. Like Missouri is very rejective of things that they don't like. I mean, they're very vocal about it. And so, we like to listen to that feedback and try to encapsulate. We move very quickly. You mentioned something earlier. We are, while I like to consider myself small, we're number 11 in pre rolls, maybe number 35 or 40 in the entire market. And probably the biggest single entity not connected to a grow or an MSO in the state. And that's wild, but we managed to do that because these are some principles I also learned from John. Even though John's a big dog up there, he was always a big person of getting in cheap and fast and letting cash flow be the means to produce your business to the point where you stop doing that and then you cut your costs and then there's where your profits at. And we raised $2 million in total to buy the license, build it all out in less than 6 months, hire all my staff. And I wish I would have raised a little bit more, but we got in like literally 1 month before the recreational vote in October of 2022. So timing really, really worked out for us. It was like a series of boosters, that just kind of like by naturally being there in the market, we're going to catch a nice drift up in buying. And so we rode all those kind of waves, and we just stayed true to our form. I didn't get all hyped and go, let's double the size of our building or buy a totally automated machine. I was just staying true to the like manual processes of weed. And I think a lot of that stems from my smoke. I'm a consumer, like I go buy everybody's weed. That's kind of the how we look at who we're going to buy from. If I could go on to a shelf and buy, I love local. Okay. Like I'm a big personal, like I smoke a lot of local bud. And, they are one of our suppliers, 3 or 4 of them. But if I go to a store and somebody's bud is crazy dry or really loose or undercured, then I know that maybe they got some problems in their supply chain, and that's probably going to scare me on where I buy. And so, there's a lot of decisions I make just because I'm listening to what people say. I'm going in and buying bud, from stores. People are telling me things, and we're trying to learn, trying to tweak it. And I get that it's a long term game. And we really just try to stay true to the guerrilla entrepreneurial mindset of, it's an asymmetric war between us who are, we'll maybe do $5 million in gross revenue. And that's a plateau for us in Missouri. It'd be very hard to get beyond that. But you got some companies that are knocking out 25 million a month, and so you do have to approach business in this market as a total like asymmetric thing. And I'm glad that we just stayed true to some solid business principles. But I do attribute that to having like good mentors, good people around that actually operate clean businesses. And it's been a pleasure to learn from a lot of really great people.
Yeah,
I
that's
I hope you don't take offense to the way that I say this, but um I think you guys are kind of the perfect model for how a micro business can be successful in Missouri, because anybody that goes in and thinks that they're going to have you know, Good Day Farm numbers with a micro business license is out of their fucking mind. It's just not possible. But can you have the best, product? Can you control a niche and make people seek you out and come to you, um, in the same way that you would if you were a craft liquor company or the best steakhouse in your state or the best steakhouse in your country? Are you a Michelin star level restaurant type of place? They don't give a shit that they're not putting out a billion hamburgers like McDonald's. They give a shit that they've got a Michelin star. And if you take
Absolutely.
that approach to your business, you can be phenomenally successful. And if you don't build a $20 million facility with $0 in your bank account, then doing $5 million in business on a $2 million build means that you just made more profit than the company that did $20 million in business on a $25 million build. And that's the part that I think a lot of people miss sometimes about the opportunity of what the cannabis business really is that there's a lot of places to start small and hustle and work your ass off and be smart and be ingenuitive and create. And if you create the way that you guys have created a brand, products, you've listened, you've adapted, you've done all the things that normally get assigned to 30 different people if you've got a $10 million budget. You've got 5 people doing them. You've got you and your wife. Shout out to your wife, who's one of the most exceptional human beings in the space. And every time I get an opportunity to see her and talk to her, if you think Michael knows a lot, she knows as much, if not more. um,
Absolutely. I mean, she's a hospital pharmacist. A lot of people think that like maybe I met her in this industry, but my wife and I, like I'm the entrepreneur. I saw the opportunity, and she was just, I mean, literally paying the bills of the hospital pharmacist while I was out chasing this dream. And then it was somebody that wasn't actually the nicest person in the world, but somebody that was in this industry that told me when they met Lily, they're like, Mike, did you know that like she would be the perfect person for as like a VP of compliance for you? Like she's probably worked with the DHSS before. And I was like, I was mad 'cause I didn't think of it. I was like, oh, this guy's got to tell me. This is my old wife. I live with her. And I was like, yeah, this guy's actually right. And that's a challenge, to be in a business, a cooperative business. She's managing HR and payroll, and she's a very intelligent person, and I managed to bring her on over. But that doesn't mean, I have a very commanding style of leadership at my business. I'll bark an order and have an expectation of execution, right? Like a yes, sir, a level of execution. Now imagine having your wife be in that scenario, right? You either then have to change and adapt yourself in your own personal style, which is always necessary, or you work with that person to communicate to them about like, hey, don't take this personal. Like when you come here, you have to have a different hat. You're my VP of compliance. And I'm so sorry that I have to treat you not like my wife and more like somebody that I cooperate business with. And that took a little while for us to get honed in, but now we both have kind of our own little space that we handle. But like why we stay a very, very clean business is because of her. I mean, there are many companies that have great intentions, but maybe hire the wrong people, or people get desperate while working there and make poor decisions that then affect the overall business. And, as somebody who was in hospital pharmacy, she understands the DHSS technicality. She's on the MCRC advisory panel. for compliance in the state. She's a total rock star, but she's much more quiet, but much more personable and kind and outgoing than myself. So a lot of people like to hang out and talk with her. But yeah, there absolutely is critical people behind this business, and she is right up there.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to forget to go back to your product line because obviously Blunt Kings, but you got the pre-rolls, you got vapes, you have the heavy hitter drinks, which from where I was seeing, are those like tall boys?
Okay, so when I did drink, which was like 10 years ago,
Yeah.
I loved Budweiser tall boys. All
Yeah.
right. Going
Of
to the
course.
Lake of the Ozarks,
Yeah.
drinking with everybody.
For
You got a
sure.
tall boy, right?
Yeah.
And that's just not a commonly used format in this space. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, we've got 100 I felt like it was good for a 100 milligram beverage. And
Yes. That makes
our
sense.
product line, as we talked about with like a niche, for example. Okay, another lesson to be learned here is you can't just go into a market, own a license, say Missouri, because the cost to get in and only be in one niche. So, for example, blunts, the consumer is only reaching into their pocket and spending about $200,000 a month on blunts. So even if I own 67% of that category, we're talking about like beverages are 800,000 a month. We're talking about vape pens that are 20 million a month, and so you have to have products in every category and a nice, well diversified buy. Kind of like, investing in stocks. You don't want to be overly
Hmm.
invested in anything. And we got a nice pie today. I have a bunch of blunts, somewhere around 20-30% of it is every kind of blunt you could imagine, from a half gram to an infused one to pack. And then we make regular pre rolls. Our party packs are probably our best selling product in the market. It's a 10 pack of half gram pre rolls from the best bud that we can buy, and it's not like a blend. It's the name of the strain. You can ask us who we got it from, and so we'll go out and buy and put that into pre rolls. And then I have the beverage category that's maybe 10 to 15%. We have the Guys line and the Franklin's line, and they're both contributing about the same amount to the bottom line. They're both very profitable, but like it's a slow and steady category. But really, most people don't know it about us, but our vape pens is the number one profit driver to our business. I mean, we're number 32 or 33 in the vape category, and I'm making more off vape pens than I am off the blunts, because blunts are such low margin. Even though I'm serving a niche, and it's like that category used to be 4 or 500,000 a month, so it has its own little waves. People and consumer trends change, and like that's where, like, getting into this, it was just like we got to build a good brand that people trust, and to get people to trust that, you always have to be quality, and you got to be customer service oriented. And like, there's a lot of stuff on the back, and you just can't say that and put that on a marketing script. You have to have the protocols in your business. So like, every ounce of bud that comes in, every pound is getting videoed and then sent into a company chat, where me or anybody else that has stake in this thing can look at that bud and go, "Oh, you're returning that. That looks like a bunch of larf. We're not taking that." That level of commitment and quality and communication is what has to happen for us to survive and get past things. But like you talked about, like survival as a micro. A lot of people think I am a micro, just in how I think and how we behave and whatnot. But there's some behaviors that we do that others don't. I'm willing to fulfill a few $100 order. I mean, there's times where we do sell to Good Day Farm, but sometimes they only order $560 or something. And you're like, you go through those times where you're like, do I fulfill it? And the answer is always yes. $500 in your pocket is better than not having $500 in your pocket. Okay. And fulfilling that order, that fill and kill, has really kept us around. It's allowed us to stay stable rather than getting into the huge pumps and huge promos and then, hey, when's it coming back? It's just a slow and steady tortoise strategy. And it's
Yeah.
worked well for us.
Well, you're not only just, being stable, now you're expanding. So it's working, all these little decisions. So
Absolutely.
let's get into that.
It's crazy. If you would have said that if in 3 years we'd be expanding to our next state, I wouldn't have been able to predict that in my little spreadsheets and financial models and stuff. It was all a surprise because of the headset story. And then that basically caused some people to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I love blunts. I think my state would love blunts." And so one of those that was first was Arizona. A lot of people from a business standpoint, you look at that market and you'd say, don't enter it. It's not in its prime. If you're in an early market, it's like easy money, or you're in a market that's on an upturn, it's easy money. But it's different if you're entering in the dip. And I do feel that Arizona is a market I'm entering at the bottom of that dip. All right. There's like so many things I've learned about. I feel like I went to the future, got in a time machine, went to the future, learned about where somewhat maybe Missouri could be, and then come back and apply some of those principles. And so we'd gotten a phone call from a group named Consensus out there that has Keith and Kiva and a bunch of other brands. And they were in a meeting with a buyer that said, "What do you got for blunts?" And some guy in the sales room named Gianni said, "Man, I've been following this guy on Instagram and they're like the number one blunt." Showed it to them and they're like, "We want it." And so within a few months, we had a deal together. And then we launched exclusively at this group called Soulflower, which was a 9-unit store owned by Copper State Farms. And they've been, I mean, these guys have been an incredible partner. I've learned so much about what good partners could look like that I'm coming back to Missouri, giving them ideas, going to my best dispensaries, going, "Man, I was out here and we did this thing and it was crazy successful. And I think we should do it here." And so I think that's really like core strategies we're expanding out. It's like, yeah, Missouri's home base. I'm not buying any licenses anywhere else. It's really hard to buy a license and maintain it and keep it profitable. And so we're basically doing deals where, maybe we're just providing packaging, maybe we're just taking a royalty, but really the core of it is doing that branding, doing that cool, exciting merchandise delivery to, hiring a rep and market to take jackets like these and t-shirts and get into the bud tenders and let them know we give a shit about you guys. We care about what you think. We want to be your friends. And that's given us, an incredible ability to go from 9 to now 12 stores. Maybe, by the end of the year, we're at 20 or 25. And that's cool. I'm okay with that. I don't need a big launch. I don't need to be in, we're at 130 dispensaries in Missouri. I don't need to be in that amount tomorrow in Arizona. I'm just kind of letting the organic balls roll. And so we could get in real cheap and play it the tortoise way, and it works out pretty well. And so it's stayed true. It's allowed us to then, we got another phone call from a group in New Jersey. That's an interesting market. That's a little bit newer, not in a dip, but in kind of those early market economics where it's a little bit easier to make money. But because there's been so many entrants, there is some competition. But it's fascinating. Blunts are loved in certain areas. There's certain places that you go around and they're like, "Hey, dude, are you the blunt guy?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "I know I don't look it. I know I'm just a nerd, but everybody smokes blunts." And then when you tell them that, they laugh because it really is true. Like if for an era of people, we all remember what it's like to break down a Swisher or someone break down a Swisher for us and fill it up with what we got. Like that was a sense of a certain socioeconomic class of people that often enjoyed that. But we're taking that experience and giving the non-nicotine, non-tobacco versions of that. And so that love and that transfer is really kind of resonated, I guess. When I go out and talk to bud tenders, they get that I could sit here and talk to them about the science of the paper that we buy and where we buy it and why we do what we do. They want to hear that stuff. They want to hear the owner of the company come out and tell them to their face, "This is what we're trying to do." And that's been successful for us. And I probably need to do more of that in Missouri. I have a privileged position that I don't have to knock on every door here because I have a whole team and staff of people that built those relationships. But I like working, guys. I like getting on the plane, wearing my Franklin shirt, going out, picking up some bud at every dispensary. I'll go bring a little bit of cash and buy bud, roll them up into some zigzags and find out who's got good bud in the Arizona market or who's got good bud in the New Jersey market. And so, maybe that's a little bit what contributes to it, but it's just fun. I'm living my life. I'm really enjoying it.
Love it. Love that story. I love it.
Tim's got to get out of here.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a daddy-daughter
Lunch
date.
with lunch
Awesome.
with dad.
that is celebrating like school stuff. And
I'm gonna jump off here, but Michael, so nice meeting you. This was great.
Likewise.
I loved hearing about this.
Well,
Good luck,
it's
guys.
very nice meeting you as well. Enjoy yourself and enjoy your lunch.
I will. Thank you, guys.
bye, buddy.
All right. It is that time of year when everybody is pretending to be festive, stressing out about gifts, and eating way too many cookies. So Curio Wellness decided to step in with something a little bit more enjoyable. They just dropped their winter limited edition vapes, and honestly, the packaging is doing more for the holiday spirit than any of my actual decorations. They've got 5 brand new flavors: candy brandy, apple fritter, chocolate mint, iced cherry cookies, come on, and lava cake. If that doesn't scream holiday magic, I don't know what to tell you. It's like your favorite desserts teamed up with premium curio cannabis and said, let's take the holidays up a notch, shall we? Same curio quality, just dressed up for the holidays. These are limited time, so don't wait around. Stuff your own stocking early and grab Curio's winter limited edition vapes at a dispensary near you, Brandon. Happy holidays, everybody.
Tim is on his way to go hang out with his daughter. He gets to go do the dad thing this afternoon, which is one of the
That's what
best
it's all about,
things
man. I mean,
about
I have,
about being a grown up. Yeah.
having that freedom to be able to go spend your time with your kids how you want to spend it is critical in modern times, And it's great that
Yeah,
I've got a business that gives me the freedom to do that.
that's the best part of being in a financially secure position. No matter whether you're making $10 million a year, or whether you're making just enough to pay all the bills and not have to worry about taking PTO to leave for an hour to go to your daughter's
Yeah.
lunch at school or something like that. So um I will say I'm going to send you a care package from my friends over at Day Savers, just because I went through and read all the science on the papers, rolling papers a couple years ago and stuff like that, and the team over at Custom Cones and Day Savers really got me into paying attention to what the papers are like, because I as somebody that worked in the industry, I had seen a few times where you send something off for testing and all of a sudden it was fine, and now we're getting hit for like heavy metals and stuff like that.
Yep.
um and it was literally the papers. So
I'd
Day
love to.
Savers and Custom.
I got to check that out. I'd love to smoke those. I just came back from our paper manufacturer and got to kind of learn about what other industries put in their products, what other competitors put in their products, and what makes things natural. What is the science behind paper density and all those types of things. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm starting to
it's really
really
fascinating.
yeah, I'm starting to really appreciate those things. As we become a bigger buyer, I get access to, like that. It took me 2 years to even get these people to answer an email, nonetheless allow me to go to visit their factory. And,
That's so crazy.
it is. And these people, and imagine like the state regulations in Missouri require that every ingredient within that paper be listed on the back of your stuff. There's not another industry that requires that. And so when you call up paper manufacturers, they're very resistant to giving you the ingredients list. And that's a challenge. And so that's kind of a big part of why I went and visit our paper guys. Everything's always a threat. If I'm buying a bunch of blunts, I got to know I got blunt paper, man. So,
Yep.
we're looking to put those 2026 blunt orders in and buy them by the roll now. But,
the the thing the thing that got me was tips.
mhm,
Whenever companies started rolling out tips and stuff like that, that's what really got me into blunts. Was I suck at rolling, man. So whenever they came
yeah,
out with pre-rolled cones and with tips on them, I was like, okay, we're in business now. Like I can be into this. I That's why I like your product. It's already ready to go for me. That's my I tell everybody all the time, like, in on a long enough timeline, the flower part of the industry is going to shift significantly to pre-rolls and blunts and things like that. And I think if anybody doubts that, they just have to look at the tobacco industry. Like, everything about our culture is based on convenience and ease of use. And you can still buy pipe tobacco, you can still buy loose tobacco and roll your own cigarettes and things like that. But 95% of the tobacco market is, you know, uh, already rolled. And
yeah,
I think that cannabis is gonna get to the same stage. We're seeing your perfect example. We started at, 1 and 3 packs, and now we're seeing anywhere from 5 packs to there's a couple companies that do 15 and 20 packs of
mhm,
pre-rolls.
yeah,
And those are some of my favorite things, are those 10, 15, 20 packs where you get a bunch and you go and you get to be weed Santa. You just hand out a bunch of stuff and you're like, "Oh, do you like it? It's from this company. Remember that
Yep.
name." It works better if you're wearing the t-shirt or the hat or whatever. But if you're not, then just ingrain it into the conversation and stuff. The expansion from where you guys were to where you are now, and the fundamental principle of go in easy. I think that's one of the things that I admire about what you guys have done, is that everything has been the right play for the most part, as far as like how to do it in a way that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. Um, Steezy, whenever they came into Missouri, completely different company, completely different culture, everything like that.
Yep.
An established brand for years in California. But whenever Steezy came into Missouri, they had a huge marketing campaign. They went out and they got salespeople from that were already successful at other companies and things like that, and it worked really well for them, especially early on. But they made a huge splash and a ton of ripples, and it goes out and out, and then like anything else, it starts to contract back a little bit, especially if you're not, in with certain companies. You can have the
Absolutely.
biggest brand in the room, but if you don't have control over any of the facilities, that brand only carries you so far. What you guys did was create a product and a brand that can work with everyone and can come in and build its reputation a piece at a time, and that seems to be what you're recreating in these other state partnerships and things as well. I really like that because it feels much more organic, and uh, it honestly feels like traditional, cannabis culture. Is you didn't come in and advertise to everybody that you had, you didn't have billboards and online web ads saying that we have new, ATF, or we have new, flower from wherever it happened to be grown at the
Right.
time. From we got in a whole bunch of stuff from the Green Triangle in California this week,
Yep.
guys. um you had to go in, and it went to one or two people, and those people smoked it and sold it, and it organically became like, hey, have you tried this stuff yet? And there's a few other companies that I feel like have done that. I think Monopoly Melts did that, kind of the
Yeah.
way that they came into market. They're little different in the way that they came to market, from what you guys did, but it played true to the culture and true to the brand, and you don't have to be splashy to have impact. You just have to your point, be willing to wait for the reputation to catch up to the quality.
Absolutely. And honestly, a lot of it is if we're talking competitive culture, you want to talk about surviving, just let people compete against each other. I mean, when you get in silent, you don't draw too much attention to yourself. Okay. So, like, by announcing that we were the number one blunt in America, the Missouri category has gone from 4 people making blunts to now 17 people making blunts. And that's a pretty good use case. And I was willing to do it because I knew what the trade off was. The trade off was that I get a lot of attention. It's going to bring me some other states. Sure, I'll go ahead and compete with anybody else that wants to come down in my tiny little niche. Cool. But getting and putting that out has absolutely created immense competition for me in that category. And so, by getting in a market early when you're small like us, to be quiet and silent and just focus on the one-to-one relationships and not be out there waving your flag that we're coming here or anything like that. Sometimes that consumer even doesn't know that you come from Missouri, which is sometimes a benefit for you. It just is a kind of a mainstream brand. And if you partner with the right people and got the right people coming in the door, it almost feels like it is part of their culture. And as they see things modify and people say, oh, well, I hear they listen that we didn't like half-gram blunts, so they're only doing 1-gram blunts now. Wow, that company listens. And you do that long enough, then they kind of give you a pass. That gives you room and freedom that if you ever had a mess up, which is very few and far between with Franklin's, but if you ever had a mess up, they're very accepting over it. We've done them right, we've treated them right, and that's done well to our business. But being silent has definitely been more beneficial as the small guy. I've learned definitely my lessons in announcing your moves too far in advance, or beating your chest too much about how, we are number one cool. But every time I say that, there's some other guy out there who's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to come take your number one spot. And I love it. I'm driven by that stuff. Don't mind it. But, people do recognize our subtleness in both brand and business approach. And, I think that resonates pretty well.
Well, that's one of the things about building a brand, not just a company, right? Because you can have a shitty brand and have a great company if you own a license or multiple licenses in a state. But to your point, you don't have to own any licenses in any states. You could sell your licenses in Missouri tomorrow as long as you had a franchise or a licensing agreement or something to
Yep.
carry on the brand. If you have a brand and you get to a certain point, I don't know that most people know where Pepsi is made. I don't know. I think Coca-Cola is kind of synonymous with Atlanta and Georgia and stuff like that at this point, but I don't know that most people know where McDonald's was founded, or the average
Yep.
consumer knows where Target is based, or anything like that. When you get to a certain level, the brand speaks for itself. The brand is its own culture rather than being synonymous with just being a St. Louis company or just a Kansas City company or just a Missouri company or something like that. And those are all great, but you know, whenever we're looking at a national scale, um, the national brands that are most successful aren't a lot of times based on that home state feel or whatever it happens to be. Bucky's is bigger now because it's not in one state type of thing. And so that's what I've always liked about brand building is if you build a brand, if you build a culture, you don't have to have control of the operations anywhere else. You just have to make sure people are living up to the standards that you set.
Yep. Yep. And that's, it's about all about finding the right partner, and we're looking for established partners that are already indoors. While I love entrepreneurship, I don't want to gamble my business on a startup that's just out there trying to make it in the market. I want people with doors that just recognize, hey, I could plug in. To them, it might be 2 million a year. Blunts and infused blunts may mean $2 million in wholesale revenue to somebody, which is $2 million in retail value, 4 million total. So, is somebody that's already clipping out $10 million a year, that's already in 80 doors or plus, they could go, oh, hey, here's an easy way to turnkey us $2 million. Let's go let these guys unleashed in our market. And that is maybe a small segment for them, but it's a segment. They love it. And it's been cool. I know there'll be more competition. We got more products we're going to be producing, more types of blunts. We've kind of had the same type of blunt since the beginning. But, we recognize that people want to smoke different ways and different things. And, it takes time to R&D it, but I love R&D. So, you always can expect something fresh is going to come from us from a product standpoint or, whatever's next. And, you always have to remain relevant. And, we just really try hard and realize that you can't stop. There is no coasting in cannabis for sure.
What is the next progression of blunts in the cannabis industry, and for you guys in particular?
Well, I mean, we make blunts with a blend today. And, that requires 3 to 4 strains to be mixed together for us to create what's an entourage effect. And so you can imagine, while I'm aiming for the same amount of consistency and people like it, I could get better, kind of like making hash. You could go all the way back to the genetics and start looking at what better genetics can I have to make better hash. And that's kind of where we're at now is that while that wrap is there, I've gone to the factory to figure out how am I going to get the freshest that isn't being shipped all around the world, that is as cleanest as possible as I can get. And then the back half of that is, we're exploring producing our own flower line here in Missouri. And while that's like cool and new potential line of revenue, it's really about like, okay, well, what is the Franklin's way? And so to commit that way, we'll be committing to, building out a genetics library and figuring out what's going to go into our blunts and then what's actually going to be flower that we produce that we sell, to the end consumer. And so while I'm not looking to buy myself a multi-million dollar cultivation facility, there's absolutely right now a lot of people willing to carve out some rooms. And, this is the first time ever, there's some people out in St. Louis that are 4 or 5 independent brands that are kind of all in the same space, working with one another to get out there. And if anybody remembers what the market was like a year ago, nobody was saying yes to anybody for anything, nonetheless, coming into their space and producing something. And so it is a really great opportunity for us to kind of test, does our loyal Franklin base want a very small but quality produced line? I mean, it's not going to be thousands of pounds and tens of thousands of square feet. It's just like Franklin's. We're going to start small, one room. Maybe it's 2,000, total pounds that it's going to get produced over the year. Maybe it's only 150 or 200. We don't know yet. Like, I think that's maybe probably one of the more exciting parts of Franklin's is that we're willing to get into stuff, knowing that it's probably going to be a good opportunity, but that we're going to have a lot to figure out and that we trust our decision making ability to figure it out. And so, like, how do you control quality of those things as somebody who's not maybe in there day in and day out? And maybe the answer is putting a piece of technology in the curing stage and agreeing on what curing process is and what our quality looks like to go into them. Maybe I'm bagging everything, but that's really where, at the end of the day, like the back end of it, like blunts, sure, we could all make the different forms and types and form factors. But at the end of the day, it's just the wrap that puts it around quality. And if you don't have quality, fresh bud in it, it doesn't matter what blunt wrap you're going to put in it. You could terpene dip that thing like they do in some markets and make it smell like strawberry. It's still going to smoke terribly. It's going to hurt your throat and it's going to hurt your lungs. And so, for someone like us where we're not full vertical, that's pretty critical. If we're able to have access to grow out our own product and put exactly what we want inside berries and cherries and make that the same thing every time, that is just absolutely game changing. And today, we have to spend millions of dollars on bud and distillate. And, our take home cash is that, dispensaries is that, my wholesalers is that, like I'm the bottom of the pit there. So anywhere I can get verticalness, is a help to the bottom line. It allows us to do more, produce more, make better decisions. And so, that's really kind of honestly the next for us is how do we just get better quality bud, fresher, maybe that we control, maybe at better price for us. Maybe that's a better price to the consumer. But, we'll see where that goes. That's, probably a 3 to 4 month play for us, but that's absolutely been heating up. And honestly, if there's anybody sitting on the bench wanting to build a brand, you should pick up the phone, go call people right now. I mean, there's just not a better time to be a new brand in the state of Missouri than right now.
I'd say the aside from the quality, the consistency part seems to me to be the almost the bigger takeaway than having control over, necessarily the quality, because I you're getting good weed right now to put into your product, but to the point that you made of, if you have berries and cherries, that's the thing that separates Coca-Cola from, some other companies, is it tastes the same every time you get it
Yep.
out of the McDonald's fountain or something like that. And so having the same input over and over and over and really dialing it down to exactly what it is and being able to make it exactly what you want it to be without having to just go with what might be available or ever having to wait because, oh, this wasn't harvested at this time, or we decided to swap something out. Those little changes, those micro changes in other people's businesses have severe effects on, independence, whenever you're not in control. So I love that. I love that that's the direction that you guys are going. I'm super excited to see what the terpene and cannabinoid profiles and what cultivars matter to you. I think that the market is starting to move towards the idea that weed is more than just THC percentage,
Yeah,
and weed is more than just something that uh, everybody that enjoys getting high. But there, you can get high and enjoy the taste and the flavor and the experience more
absolutely.
than a lot of people understand.
Orange 43 is that for me. Okay. I love Orange 43 from local. I can smoke it and it feels like it's medicine to me. I'm like a whole different human when I smoke Orange 43, but my wife doesn't like the smell of it. She thinks it's too fruity, it smells too citrusy. She's a sherb head person, and sherb head is amazing. But I really like a citrus smelling. It just hits me. But that's not the way it is for everybody. But I agree with you. I think that like what Franklin's entering a market from a flower standpoint, there's a lot of questions to be asked because I don't think anybody has the answer. You couldn't come to any market today as a new flower brand and sell the same story of, oh, I've got the best genetics and we've got all these grower cup things. It's not like really at the end of the day, I don't want to say anybody doesn't care, but it's really hard for a consumer to walk in and understand all this stuff. I mean, you got to kind of think about how little interaction that they have with our industry and how they're trying to make their decisions. And so, yeah, I think we are moving off of like I'd say 30% plus. I don't think anyone in Missouri really, while we love seeing that, we all kind of look at each other and go, I don't think that's where we're at yet here in this market. A lot of people in the 20 range, and I get that top shelf's in that 30, but when we're buying all day long in the 20%, and those things hit. And especially when you blend them together and you get an entourage effect, it just feels like a polar spectrum high. And that's kind of like why people report when they smoke our product, like, oh man, it hits. It's a mix of it being fresh and good bud, but it's hitting better than a 30 percenter because you're getting more variety in terpenes, flavonoids, even the types of THC that's going to be in your body. It's going to be a wider spectrum of it.
Hey, Tim, did you know that sometimes when you buy something, it actually does some good in the world? That's exactly what's going on with the newest good taste gummies flavor, Patriot Pop at Kind Goods. Every time you pick up a 1,000 milligram tin, Good Taste donates $1 to Dogs for Our Brave. That's a charitable organization that's helping support veterans with trained service companions. It's such an easy way for you and me and everybody else to make our purchases matter. So next time you're at Kind Goods, grab a pack of Patriot Pop gummies and be part of something that gives back all year long.
You guys are creating the entourage effect by the way that you're formulating your blends and stuff, and that
100%.
that's something that goes along with the entire mentality of, you know, the we have a lot more restrictions than the liquor industry, but the biggest parallel to the cannabis industry is the liquor industry. And I always look at where we're at now as like the late 80s, early 90s as it pertained to wine. Whenever I was growing up and I was a kid, wine was always the thing that like you had at fancy dinners or that rich people had, at dinner or whenever
Mhm.
they were out and stuff like that. And then fast forward to senior year of high school, and every float trip, we had, bottles of wine with us and stuff like that. Because somewhere in the 80s and 90s, a bunch of people decided that they wanted to learn a little bit more about wine. And you don't have to only buy $100 bottles, and you don't have to, think
Yep.
that you can still get drunk off of a $4 bottle of wine, but you can also enjoy a $6 or $7 bottle of wine or a $15 bottle of wine, because now you understand that red is different from white and white's different from Zinfandel, and
Yep.
sangria. You can mix it together and have a sangria, and you
You're
start
saying all
to.
this, and I'm starting to think that we need our version of the movie Sideways. But the wine, isn't that the name of the one with the
Yeah,
wine?
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm not
Thomas
drinking
Hayden
any Merlot.
Church.
Yeah, we need
Yeah,
that version for like the sophisticated weed one. Where everyone's
yeah.
like, oh, this cultivar and this and that, and they go around tasting all this stuff. I mean, whoever does that kind of stuff, Seth Rogen, I don't know who it is, but they need to get on that for
Man,
sure.
Seth Rogen would be perfect for that too, because he really is like kind of a cannabis connoisseur. Um, and yeah, man, like I feel like we're getting to the point where people are actually learning about weed, instead of just smoking whatever they're handed. People have developed, uh, maybe they don't know the name, but they know the flavor profiles or the effects that they like. They
Or I
don't they
saw
don't
that in
know
my friend's
which.
hand and I had it that night and, I'm willing to try that. I mean, there's absolutely that, the journey is absolutely a carousel for every consumer, but we're
Yeah.
getting more people that are, going, "Oh, I've tried enough of the blind trying, now starting to turn into the educated process. And I feel like they typically start with brands. They'll see,
Yes.
Vibe Cannabis, Amaze have all done good jobs doing consumer level campaigning for their product lines and the things that they're doing. And, that really does drive interest and drive traffic, and it pushes this industry forward. At the end of the day, the consumer wins. We are talking on the industry about all the back end stuff, but the consumer is really winning right now. You're getting more access to brands. There are more promotions and discounts than ever before in the state, and it's not going to be going away. And so, people do complain about pricing, but you have to consider how much promotional work we do in this state. Not as bad
It,
as like Arizona, but
the pricing argument sincerely bothers me because while everything from a consumer perspective, because while everything else in the world went up in pricing and fluctuates up and down, whether it's your gas bill, your electric bill, the gasoline you put in your car, milk, eggs, whatever,
mhm,
uh, it-
variable.
it's never going to be lower than what it was 5 years ago or whatever that happens to be. But we consistently bring the price down in cannabis. Now, whenever you compare, us to established markets you're not comparing apples to apples because you've got startup costs and things like that. And what you're seeing it at a large scale across every business in that state because it's all new businesses, no matter whether they
Yeah.
have the name Cresco or the name Greenlight or whatever. If that state just came online, it's a new business in that state. They
Yep.
spent money to get there. And so we start at this price and we bring it down. Missouri was one of the fastest markets to reach, reasonable prices. California was still selling top shelf, and I remember looking at it the day we had our first sale in Missouri, and we had $65 eighths. And cookies was still selling for $65 at dispensaries in California. And it's like, look, like we're not that far off, but
Yeah.
because Oklahoma opened at the same time and they had 2,000 dispensaries in a span of 2 months, maybe 4 months, people were looking at it and going, "Whoa, why is this so much cheaper?" Well, because they aren't playing the same game.
Yep.
There wasn't the same level of regulation, there wasn't testing requirements, there were a lot of things that made those completely different. Missouri's done a really good job of keeping pace with not, uh, you know, dumping, prices so severely that it killed businesses.
Especially
Well,
on wholesale distillate and bud. No offense, but we all need to get real about where our pricing is. I'm buying hordes of it, but we're still paying like almost mid-market prices where we're at. But Missouri, you are right. Missouri has not because fortunately we don't have a bunch of outdoor grows that will throw that distillate price down so low. Some states it's $250 for a kilo of distillate. That just knocks all the profit out and anything that you're going to be able to make to drop it that low. But that is also a lazy strategy, to always aim low and always go for the low price cost leader. There's absolutely ways to maintain margin, maintain price, add more promotions, do more things without just going the traditional price drop and dropping the stuff on the wholesale side too. We're talking about nominal pennies sometimes. If you drop a kilo of distillate from 7,500 to 6,500, you're talking about maybe 10 cents of a cost savings on certain products. So it's not like, you'd have to have drastic changes in it, but there's a level that we all have to accept, and my predecessor was big on this too. There's all a level that you got to accept to work with one another, where everybody's making some money, so you can continue producing this product out in the market. Otherwise, you're going to get bad operators that then fall out and crash out and let everybody down. And, I just accept that I've got to pay what I view as very high pricing, but that honestly maintains stuff in this industry. And so it's like, if you watch Landman, they talk a lot about the oil business, and they're always wanting the price of oil to be between this price and this price because, you go too high and then everybody is high on life and they make poor decisions. And when it's down here, people are going bust and they're losing it all. And so there's some sense of stability if that's what you're aiming for. And Missouri is absolutely. I went to Connecticut and got a $65 eighth, and it was the worst eighth I've ever had. Like out of any state I got, it was fluffy, it was terrible, it was worse than any in an early med market I ever had. At $65 an eighth and huge taxes. And then I go right across the way to Massachusetts, much better. New York, much better. Jersey, better. And so it's just like it is early market economics. And I do feel that Missouri has been a lot of really good entrepreneurs. We don't have today the super big MSOs that are publicly traded. In the future, we will. The DCR has made it very, very clear that publicly traded companies will be coming into this market. And so there will be bigger fights to fight, bigger dogs that are going to be coming out there. But, that's just the nature of and the market evolution. Arizona is nothing but big dogs, Veranos, every big name you can imagine. They're the ones that own all that market. And, I don't think that it has to go that way, but I do think it's going to be diversified. There are bigger dogs, bigger than anyone that exists in the state of Missouri today, that are looking to come here. And, everybody just has to prepare that it's always going to be changing from here on out. It's going to be hard for us to get 6 months of stability if there's always new players coming in. So you just kind of got to plan for that. But, I think where we're at today, it's like, it is kind of Squid Game. Whoever's left, where I'm looking around at the owners meeting every year, I'm like, wow, this room keeps getting smaller, guys, and I'd love to see more entrepreneurs in it. We've got a lot of very established businesses here. I love seeing new brands. I love seeing new niches, even if those companies aren't successful long term, I think the consumer wins. They want to try these things, but it's an interesting market. I'm okay with the regulations. It is one of the most regulated states in the entire country, but it honestly is a competitive advantage if you're a nerd and you follow rules and all those things. So that works out. I don't think we could be as successful anywhere else as we were how we came into the Missouri market. It was really a mix of timing and circumstance that got us to where we are. And I've learned that too. I mean, think of how many good brands have come into the market that you're like, they're going to be a crazy success. And then they're not at all. And then they're gone in 6 months, And so I do feel blessed that we're still around. I feel blessed that we have customers that still want to place orders for us, that we're not letting our ego go to our head, that we're still fulfilling those small orders and doing those small things and staying true to it. And I just feel like if we stay true to that and keep our head down, we'll still be here at the 2030 ownership meeting, which maybe if I'm lucky, to be honest with you, if you want to ask me, hey, Mike, what's your end game? I'm building a business. It could absolutely just be a successful business that continues on, but I really view us as a whiskey brand. I view that we are a company that, while we may be niche and maybe to the big conglomerate, it's only a few $1,000,000, but it's a really dedicated group of people that are real cool, that want to take this product they're very passionate about into every state and every country possible. So if there's ever somebody along the line that's a big, big dog that wants to put a little nice Scotch whiskey brand, Franklin's, and a weed version of it into their portfolio and then let those guys run and build that business out while they reap the benefits, that would be a dream. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't have some dream to beat my chest to be the 100% owner of this. I want to see my investors see a return. I want to see this business become successful. I want Franklin's and our blunts to be the blunt you think about in every state that is legal and every country that I can go to. And if there's some partner that could accelerate to me that's to me living my life. That creates an exit for people. That's amazing. I think that's a point of entrepreneurship, is to create, a capital return for people. That's something I stay pretty true to. And, we'll see where it goes. But, I love this business. Where else could a guy like me who doesn't have a scientific background, and I'm not an engineer and I can't wire or code, what other industry could I go into to have a chance to changing my economic station in life like this? And it's hard to find. So I really enjoy, and I do feel like I'm trying to stay true to the plant, what it's trying to tell me. And that's the opposite of greed. Greed takes over a lot in our industry. So, hopefully I just keep smoking pot and it keeps giving me good advice when it puts me in those mindset and doesn't give me like a God complex and then, destroy my company like many people. But,
It seems to be giving you good advice so far.
yeah, I mean, 10 years of drinking versus 10 years of not drinking, a whole different person. For me, it's a medicine. I think at the end of the day that deep down in my ethos, this is a medicine and we treat it that way. And my wife feels the same way about it. So it's affected me in my life. I always like to say I'm spreading the good word of the plant, because it really does want you to be like, hey, hey, guy, like I think Quentin Lucas said something at MoCan last year, which was pretty important. My wife and I often remind ourselves of, which is, we're sometimes shy to talk about what we do and what industry we're in, but we need to talk about it more. And, when we're going and meeting with someone that's from church or someone that's from somebody's school and they ask us what we're doing, we're very upfront with them. I'm in a cannabis industry. I have a cannabis license, blah, 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 blah. People have tons of questions, but like that's part of the community work that you've got to do as a business owner is go out there and get more people interested in it and know that, oh, well, I mean, like these are like a nice suburban couple, like not everybody's like this drug dealer I think they are. And it's a big passionate part of ours to just break down that barrier of what people think about cannabis. We've watched it in Missouri. I've watched it with my family. It's not as harmful as people think it is. And especially as good operators who really care about the plant get more into the market, you see more of that. So, I love Missouri. I love people of Kansas City. They've treated us well. And, I hope we can stay true to that.
We've the industry overall has come a long way whenever you think about just where we legalized medical in 2018 in November, and then by the end of 2019 we were awarding licenses 2019 and beginning of 2020, and then 3 months later we had a pandemic.
Yeah.
And and so to think about where we were and what attitudes were in Missouri as well as nationally towards weed and cannabis in 2018, 2017, obviously attitudes were changing and perceptions were changing if we were legalizing in so many states. But the stigma was in a way different place than where it is now. I talk about destigmatization versus normalization. We've been destigmatized pretty solidly for a while. Whenever you've got Netflix and Discovery Channel and Fox running weed themed uh, cooking shows and weed themed
Yep.
we're gonna flip this dispensary type shows and stuff like that. The Super Bowl has Martha Stewart and Willie Nelson and Snoop Dogg doing lighter promos for lighters that don't burn your fingers when you go like that,
Yeah.
because that's how you light a bowl. Whenever we're to that place, destigmatized is the right word. Normalized is not the right word, because it's okay for Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg and Willie Nelson to smoke weed. It's not okay for my kid's teacher to smoke weed. It's not okay for my
Right.
pastor at Sunday school to smoke weed. And it's not okay for the president of a company or an elected official or anything like that to smoke weed. That's where normalization comes in. And that's where having people in the industry like you guys and having people that are going out and, supporting community and building community and giving back and being helpful, they're normalizing it in a way that you can't normalize just through cooking shows and TV and stuff like that. You have to actually ingratiate yourself into the world around you and be open and vulnerable to some extent, to let people know that you're a real human being, and your business is significantly less dangerous for the health of other humans than people in the alcohol industry. And so if you're not mad at a bartender, don't be mad at a bud tender. If you're not
Yep.
mad at, the CEO of Budweiser, then don't be mad at Mike Wilson, because you guys are the same. Uh,
Right.
but uh,
Very much. All
yeah,
right.
exactly the same. But that's the real part of where we're going as far as socially is we still have to keep normalizing, because they're still teaching about marijuana and dare, but they're not making exceptions for medical marijuana. They're at sometimes
Yep.
making some kids feel isolated and like mixed messages between what's going on at home and what they're telling them in school and stuff. And so we have to normalize everything in the same way that we're to a place where people are starting to learn about weed. We have to keep pushing to normalize it with people that don't smoke weed too. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people that don't drink alcohol that are fine with going to a bar or a restaurant that serves alcohol. while it's understandable because we've had a pushback against smoke in general,
Yep.
and especially secondhand of effects and things like that. We have edibles, we have cannabis beverages, we have infused dinners, we have vapes, we have alternative methods of normalization and of consumption where we don't have to be the bad guy in the room. We don't have to argue about whether or not it's appropriate to smoke weed, 5 feet from somebody who's trying to eat dinner, something like
Yeah.
that. We don't have to do that. We can talk about, well, that's why I have a gummy, that's why I have a Franklin's lemonade right here,
That's honestly one of my
icy cold
biggest
beverage.
jokes when I go sit down with a group of people, because there's an awkward stigma when you go sit out and not drink with drinkers. And it's usually when the bartender comes over or waitress comes over and they're like, "Hey, what can I get you?" And my answer is always, "You know what? I'm going to stick with water. I'm already one gummy deep." And then everybody usually laughs at the table, and then they're disarmed because they know that I'm here to get loose too. I mean, it's just I'm not doing it through alcohol. And that in itself was hard for me, because you're first, when you stop drinking, you're kind of kicked out of your friend groups. And just getting back out there and being in those friend groups and being able to not drink and just be in the right spot you want for hours, and have a healthy consumption and wake up tomorrow while they all are hurting, and you had a great time. You never got angry. That's kind of like how weed is for me. It absolutely is a
Hmm.
social lubricant, and it's great. And it's surprising, but most people, I learned this from John Mueller. John was one of the first people to go out and say, "I own a cannabis company. I own a dispensary. I'm from Leawood. Judge me all you want." I mean, he even said it in articles like, "I'm brave enough to go out and tell you I'm the owner of this business." Not other people are doing that. And, that helps our industry. That helps give more support for it. Even if you look at like what the voting was for recreational, Kansas City really put on to get us over the finish line. Maybe if we didn't have the same support and the same energy here, maybe we wouldn't have recreational today. So, getting out there and just being honest with people about, like, this is a legal business, dude. Like, come down and see that. I offer people all the time, like, "Hey, man, come on down. I'll give you a tour." Most people don't follow up on it. But, I mean, if anybody's ever interested, that's in my ecosystem, call me up and come tell you everything I love about this business, walk you through all the little details. One of my favorite things to do. But, we need more of that. I don't know where the future is going to bring us, because we've seen a hemp ban, and now we've seen how our government's going to make decisions based upon whatever things they have behind the scenes that we don't get much of privy to know. And so, it's just, we're going to kind of wait to see how things play out. And sure, that whole industry could change tomorrow. I would really love to see a future where maybe we get interstate commerce and a guy like me can ship my product through a Shopify account, to anyone, anywhere. And, I think those types of things are coming for the horizon. It's the thing that kind of gets me up beyond the daily fight. Is it like, man, we could have some really cool stuff out here, and maybe not. Maybe it all swings another direction and we're all playing risk mitigation games. But I just don't think that's going to be the way. I think we've, to your point, we've had a level of destigmatization that people will be willing to vote for something, or Congress may be willing to vote. But I mean, it's a great product. We still have it's the longest peaceful protest in history. When you think about it, and we're all contributing to that peaceful protest. And I just want to see the plant be accepted by more people. And maybe it's something for somebody out there that's sitting on the fence, or maybe it's not something they don't want to have anything to do with, but being educated on it is better than not. And so, it's great to be able to have those opportunities and, see where the market goes. Maybe Kansas someday will pass it. I still contend that they'll be one of the last states in the union that granted that, maybe we reschedule, that gives you the option where you don't have to have it. I don't think Kansas wants it. I don't think Kansas wants to regulate it. And I'm not even saying that that's a bad decision for them, because I think you've also seen what I have with, like, how hard that is to manage, like an economic system of regulation. So you're having to ask me to recreate the wheel next to Missouri. It's $1 billion market. Like, why would you want to even do that? And so I would love a future of, like, maybe Kansas doesn't want to offer dispensary or like a whole supply chain, but maybe you could go interstate. We make a deal with Kansas and say, we'll supply you all, just open some dispensaries, and our suppliers in Missouri will just do a metric transfer you over there in Kansas. I mean, all these wild things that could come for us. They're exciting, and I think that breaks up the staleness of this industry and this business. So we'll see where it goes, but, you know, ride with the punches till then.
I think the best advice I can leave everyone with as we move towards 2026 is anytime you go out and the bartender asks you what you'd like to drink, ask them if they have a Franklin's lemonade.
Yes, that I appreciate that. That's exactly what you should ask for.
Yeah. Hey man, I really enjoyed hanging out with you today. I
Likewise.
appreciate you. I've been a big fan of your brand and of your products since you guys started making waves by being the, hemp blunts in medical dispensaries and stuff like that. Um, I'm really excited to see where you guys are headed and where you've already been. As Tim has said more than one time, this is a passion project, and we really only, uh, talk to people that we're interested in spending time with. Thanks for taking the time out of your day, and we appreciate you.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for having this platform for a guy like me to be able to speak. I know you put in a lot of work for a very long time and you continually make updates and you continue to progress and create new content. So I appreciate you giving us all the opportunity.
Thanks, man.